In today's show, let's talk about fasting and muscle, and one of the reasons why I don't do extended fasting anymore. As many of you know, fasting is counterproductive to preserving and building muscle mass, and we know that muscle is very important for longevity. Preserving strength and muscle mass has many metabolic health-related benefits, and I wanted to share with you just my perspective as well as some insights from a recently published paper titled A Muscle-Centric Perspective on Intermittent Fasting, a Suboptimal Dietary Strategy for Supporting Muscle Protein Remodeling and Muscle Mass. So as you know, intermittent fasting is very popular. I used to do extended fast. Every single quarter, I would do 3 days. Once a week, I would do a 24-hour fast. We called it Metabolic Monday. I still think this has metabolic health benefits for people that are morbidly obese, really overweight, sedentary. But I found over time, I just started to look weaker and I felt weaker in the gym. And since not fasting for extended periods of time, I have since gained significant muscle mass and strength and just overall feel better. So I just wanted to share with you my perspective as well as some of the perspectives that are being corroborated in the peer-reviewed academic literature by scientists who look through the world of muscle-centric medicine and research. We've had many experts on the podcast, Dr. Gabrielle Lyon and Sean Baker, speak to the importance of muscle and muscle strength and preserving muscle mass and grip strength and overall strength as a proxy of supporting health span. But let's hear what the scientists say, and I'll offer my perspective. And we're going to talk about how some of the benefits linked with fasting, i.e. low glucose and low insulin, are counterproductive towards muscle protein synthesis. And I want to share with you some images from this particular study. But first, let's talk about what they say. They say intermittent fasting has become a popular topic of interest in the health community, as well as an avenue to improve health and body composition, primarily via calorie deficiency, as well as enhanced lipolysis and fat oxidation secondary to attenuated daily insulin response. However, this approach belies the established anti-catabolic effect of insulin on skeletal muscle. So remember, insulin helps to prevent muscle protein breakdown. So while it might seem favorable to drop insulin to the floor and glucose to the floor, that's going to be counterproductive towards maintaining muscle health because insulin has powerful anti-catabolic properties. We're going to talk more about that in a moment. The scientists say, more importantly, muscle protein synthesis, which is the primary regulated turnover variable in healthy humans, is stimulated by consumption of dietary amino acids, a process that is saturated at a moderate protein intake. They say, while intermittent fasting may represent an option for a variety of populations to promote fat loss and improve aspects of metabolic health, additional research needs to focus on the impact of meal frequency on the quantity and quality of muscle mass, which I think is really important. And I found when I was compressing my feeding window too much, I started to lose muscle. Now, many of the gurus that promote fasting say this isn't possible. You do not lose muscle mass when you intermittent fast. And I think the nuance here is that if you don't have a lot of body fat, then excessive and prolonged fasting may be problematic. So we're going to continue to talk about this, friends, and dive into some images about how insulin stimulates muscle protein synthesis and prevents muscle protein breakdown and is not to be viewed as always bad. A lot of people have this binary approach when it comes to metabolism. Insulin bad, low insulin good, but there's nuance and context. But I just want to thank you for being here. Appreciate your likes, your comments. Let me know if your fasting strategies and tactics have changed over time as we learn more about the importance of muscle. And since we're talking about muscle, I just got to remind you about the creatine-containing electrolyte sticks by Myoscience. These are an amazing intra and pre-workout that's caffeine-free that can help you have a better workout. You know that stimulating your muscle by way of exercise is a great way to improve muscle protein synthesis and also prevent muscle protein breakdown. We naturally lose muscle mass as we age, so it's great to stimulate your muscle with exercise, and you can get more mileage from your exercise sessions with the novel creatine-containing electrolyte sticks by Myoscience. There's well over 600 reviews over on our website, myoscience.com. You can check them out, see what other people are saying, how they're using these, and how they're impacting their sports and athletic performance, as well as their intermittent fasting lifestyle. You can save with the code podcast at checkout at myoscience.com. So the scientists say, from our current understanding of muscle protein metabolism and taking a muscle-centric view, we highlight that current acute evidence for intermittent fasting may represent a counterproductive strategy to optimize muscle mass and help with muscle quality. The studies that concurrently measure muscle protein metabolism and muscle mass and function will be instrumental in resolving these issues. And so again, I think it's important to look at these different images here representing the rates of muscle protein breakdown and muscle protein synthesis when we are fasting. Let's look at figure 1 here and focus in on part A of figure 1. When you are fasting for 18, 24 hours, glucose goes down, insulin goes down, and that's where purportedly all the benefits come from, because we know that insulin helps promote fat gain, and the dearth of insulin would help enhance fatty acid lipolysis and breakdown. But what we're not focusing in on is muscle and muscle protein synthesis and preventing muscle protein breakdown, which you can see here. If you're just eating 1 meal per day, in part B of figure 1 here, you are seeing an increase in insulin as well as muscle protein synthesis and a reduction of muscle protein breakdown. Now, if you look at a time-restricted feeding protocol, eating 2 meals a day, you do see 2 bolus bumps here and an increase in muscle protein synthesis and a reduction in breakdown. And if you look at sort of a standard American way of eating, 3 or 4 spaced out meals per day, you see a net increase in muscle protein synthesis and a slowing of muscle protein breakdown. So this is where I'm going to infuse my personal opinions on this topic. I think for most people, if they have little amount of body fat, excessive fasting and eating 1 meal a day or compressing the feeding window to 18 or 20 hours might over time be counterproductive for maintaining lean muscle mass. That's just my personal perspective based upon what I've observed with clients as well as myself. So I think people who have a large amount of body fat and their primary focus from a health perspective is losing that body fat, I think prolonged fasting and compressing the feeding window to 18 to 20 hours a day makes sense, but we need to consider the importance of muscle tissue, because muscle is really important for overall metabolic health as well as resting energy expenditure. The more muscle mass you have, the higher your resting metabolic rate will be. So if you're fasting excessively and focusing myopically on just burning body fat, but aren't really paying attention to the preservation of muscle mass, I think over time that is not a sustainable strategy. So that's why I have changed my particular tactics and advise you to possibly reconsider your tactics to ensure that you're balancing the best of both worlds, trying to optimize fat loss while preserving muscle tissue. And if excessive fasting is causing you to be weaker, more lethargic, you're noticing you don't have the strength that you used to, probably dial back on the fasting knob and increase the exercise, the resistance training, as well as protein. Because we know that protein is very satiating. It stimulates muscle protein synthesis. There's a mild insulin release, which would prevent muscle protein breakdown. So I think for a long time, and Gabrielle Lyon has spoken at length about this, she has a new book that's going to dive into this, we have viewed, and I'm guilty of promoting this, we have viewed the metabolic landscape through the lens of fat being problematic. Visceral fat is bad. Fat is inflammatory. Fat releases leptin, all the problems. But we also need to take into consideration the other aspect of metabolism, which is muscle, because muscle is very important. Muscle is where 80% of your post-meal glucose is deposited within muscle. Muscle mass is inversely correlated with all-cause mortality. Strength is a proxy, a biomarker of aging and longevity. We recently shared a video finding, this was a study, finding that low grip strength was linked with accelerated biologic aging. So we can't just look through the lens of fat and maximizing fat oxidation and fat loss without also considering muscle. And so I implore you to prioritize muscle, and maybe your weight loss might be a little bit slower with this new framework that is focusing on muscle, preserving muscle, because over time, what we see is when people start to lose weight, particularly quickly, we see a loss of both body fat as well as muscle tissue. And I think that is problematic for long-term weight maintenance. And that's really been underscored in many different studies, going back to the Biggest Loser study, finding that the resting metabolic rate after they lost the weight was significantly lower compared to baseline. And then they end up regaining the weight, but have a slower metabolic rate, which is counterproductive. Why might that be? Because they lost a lot of weight quickly. A big chunk of that body weight loss was actually muscle tissue, which is compromising their overall long-term weight maintenance. So I think framing this and considering balancing fat loss with muscle mass preservation is the ideal strategy and tactic. And now we have studies, and scientists are now looking at this, finding that excessive fasting could be counterproductive to the preservation of muscle tissue, which is so important for longevity, metabolic health, aging, and much more. So in conclusion, I have changed my strategy. I'm no longer doing 24-hour fasts every week. On Mondays, I usually just have 2 meals instead of my normal 3 meals. And I try to do a little bit more aerobic exercise, bike my daughter to school, move around a little bit more, try to get into that calorie deficit, so to speak, and exercise in a low state as opposed to excessively fasting, because I have just found that, again, I just feel better, I feel stronger, and there's something, the mindset linked with aging. How you feel that you are aging impacts the rate of biologic aging. We know from the Dunedin study, that was one of the biggest factors driving the rate of biologic aging. So if you start to feel weaker, start to feel tired, you're achy, you're not as strong as you used to be, you might have a negative perception of how you're aging, and that is problematic for long-term health and optimizing longevity and health span. So I would love to know what your thoughts are. Have you changed how aggressively you are fasting? If so, what are the benefits that you've linked or have ascribed to that dietary and lifestyle prescription? And possibly, if you're increasing your protein intake, even on days where you're just eating one meal a day or 2 meals a day, I think that makes a lot of sense from a nutritional perspective. That if you are doing a lot of fasting, probably need to increase the protein, because that will help to stimulate muscle protein synthesis and prevent the muscle protein breakdown. So as always, friends, I'm grateful that you tuned all the way in. Thanks for hitting that like button, leaving a comment in the comment section below, and we'll catch you on a future episode down the road.